Hi, I'm Warren Cornelius, and you're watching Breaking the Cycle on Open Studio. We'll help you make informed decisions about the prevention, treatment, and recovery of substance addiction by consulting experienced professionals and finding evidence-based solutions. Welcome. In today's episode, we're going to chat about how 12-step fellowships influence recovery. And with us in studio today, we have Rushda. Welcome, Rushda.
Hi, Warren. Thank you for having me.
Glad to have you here. So Rushda represents Narcotics Anonymous, if I'm not mistaken. Tell us a bit about what Narcotics Anonymous is all about.
So Narcotics Anonymous is a 12-step fellowship. We're a society of people who help each other to stay clean on a daily basis. Not only to stay clean, but to live in recovery.
Okay. Explain to us, or maybe walk us through, let's say somebody comes out of treatment and he's attending his first Narcotics Anonymous meeting. What happens when he walks through that door?
So it's a really scary thing, eh? So can you imagine coming out of treatment, and usually people go into lockdown treatment centers, although there are outpatient facilities which last as long as 3 months. But coming into your first meeting is always still very, very scary. I mean, most addicts come from a life surrounded by the getting and using and finding ways and means to get more. I mean, that's our entire existence. And then walking into a meeting can be very daunting. There's a whole host of different people. So we've got black, white, colored, Indian, we've got doctors, we've got lawyers, we've got people who come, unemployed people, we've got people sweeping the streets, and we're all sitting in the same circle. We do believe that the newcomer is the most important person at any meeting, because we can only keep what we have by giving it away. So that at your very first NA meeting, you're probably going to be greeted with a hug. People are going to say, keep coming back. I don't remember anything that was said at my first NA meeting. It's just such an overwhelming experience. But what I do remember is that I met people who were just like me, people who had come from a very dark place in their lives and were looking for more, looking for a life beyond just that existence. And that's what I found, There's a sense of fellowship when we enter a room of like-minded people. And that, I think, that's probably the attraction, but it's also what keeps us coming back.
Okay. So it's called Narcotics Anonymous. What does the anonymous part of it mean?
Well, like I said, Warren, we've got doctors, we've got lawyers, but we've also got receptionists, and we've got unemployed people, and we've got people who work at NGOs, and we've got people who don't work at all, and we've got retired people, and none of that actually matters. The disease doesn't discriminate. Addiction is a disease, and the disease doesn't discriminate, and therefore nor do we. So we don't care about race and genders and sexual identity or religion or lack of religion. There's a sense of anonymity inside that circle, and that anonymity exists in a personal sense where I am not who I am outside of the rooms. I am just an addict, and that sense of identification with us, with each other, is created by that anonymity. The other side of the anonymity is the reason that I'm blurred out in the show. Is that there's still a really big stigma around addiction, and what makes it so amazing in a sense is that there's this place that we can come to and we can find recovery and we can identify and connect with like-minded people, and nobody needs to know, and that's the other side of anonymity.
I can imagine that must be such an awesome experience coming, because for somebody coming out of treatment, your whole life is turned upside down, and the life that as you knew it is completely changed. And when you come out of treatment, your wife or your spouse, your children, your parents, whatever it might be, your loved ones, they don't really understand what addiction is. They don't really understand what you're going through, and being able to walk through a door and there's a room full of people who've experienced your experiences. They share your pain, they share your struggles, they know exactly where you come from, and it's free of judgment. It must be quite an experience for anybody.
Yeah, the judgment is definitely a big thing. Like
Yeah.
I said, there's a very big stigma around addiction, and I suppose it's warranted in a way. You know, when people think of addiction, they think of someone stealing, someone lying, someone manipulating, and many of us have done that. You know, because in active addiction, and that's what we call the time that we're using, because it's a disease that never goes away. You know, it cannot ever be arrested at some point, and recovery is possible. But in active addiction, our entire lives is about the getting and the using and the finding ways and means to get more. And it doesn't matter who gets hurt in that process, you know. Most of us realized that in our addiction we were slowly committing suicide, you know, and that the person we hurt the most was ourselves. But when we step into recovery, we sort of exposed to this entire different life, you know. There's a life beyond active addiction. There's a life in recovery. And like I said, that identification is really, really big, because suddenly I'm in a room full of people and they all share my active addiction and my recovery. And that's all that matters, you know. Nobody cares what I do during the day. Nobody cares who I'm married to or who my connections are. It's just about the fact that I want recovery. And there's a camaraderie around that. So yes, it's a very, very scary experience in the beginning, but it's also extremely comforting in that moment, you know, just realizing like, oh my gosh, there are other people like me. And they're right here, like everywhere.
So
you know?
talk to us a bit about what's the importance of the fellowship? When they speak about it's a fellowship, and how important has that been in your personal recovery?
Yeah, so the definition of fellowship is a group of people that have something in common. You know, and they are fellows, and what we have in common is addiction. You know, we've got our addiction and our recovery. So there's the thing about I'm watching this fly. You can cut that, no? Okay. So the thing about Narcotics Anonymous is that we share. We share very openly and we share very intimately, you know, in these circles about ourselves. And people care, there's a connection, you know, and people care about what happens in your life. I always say the greatest gift that I got in recovery was the gift of empathy. Because a couple of 24 hours ago, several years ago, I didn't care about anybody else, you know. I didn't care about you, I didn't care about my kids, I didn't care about my mom, about my husband, about any of those things. It was all about me. And suddenly, when I started working a program, a 12-step program, I learned empathy. And that empathy kind of extended into not only the people who are immediately in my life, but it also extended to the people in the rooms, the fellowship, you know. And there's something amazing that happens when we care about each other. It's just, there's a magic that happens when we care about each other.
So does this fellowship run? Sorry, we just ran out of time. We're going to have to go to an ad break. We'll be right back after the break. Welcome back to Breaking the Cycle on Open Studio. We're chatting to Rushda from Narcotics Anonymous. Rushda, tell us, is Narcotics Anonymous a religious program?
No, in fact, it's quite the contrary. We are a spiritual program, and there is a spiritual base. We talk about higher power, or a power greater than myself, and we refer to that higher power sometimes by the word God, but it's not religious at all. We're a spiritual, not religious program known as Narcotics Anonymous. So I think the higher power and the power greater than myself stems from this concept of powerlessness. You know, in active addiction, there's a lot of fighting that happens. There's a lot of, I want to stop using, I'm going to stop using, I need to stop using, you know. It's not just, people don't just, I didn't just go on for many, many years chasing highs. Completely apathetically, you know. There's always this need to stop, which incidentally is the only requirement for membership. But powerlessness can only be sort of resolved by a surrender.
Okay.
And surrender generally has a negative connotation, but it's not. Surrender simply means not fighting anymore. And if I'm powerless, and if I'm not going to fight anymore, who is going to fight this fight for me? Who's going to make sure everything's going to be okay, you know? And that we sort of resolve to a power greater than ourselves.
How does this power greater than yourself, or the concept of spirituality within NA, how has it impacted your religious beliefs as a Muslim person?
That's a bit difficult, eh? So I was never practicing Muslim. Obviously in active addiction, you know, I had this idea that there was no God. In fact, I was quite resentful at God because I believed that, you know, God put me through all of these tests and made all these horrible things happen to me. In working the program, in working the steps, the 12 steps, I realized that I made all these horrible things happen to me, you know, and in working on my relationship with my higher power, which initially was the group, you know.
Yeah.
At one point, my higher power was my mother because she knew better than I did, you know. In working through the steps and in working through what my higher power is and what that power greater than me is and what characteristics it has and what characteristics it doesn't have, and all of those things are answered within the 12 steps, I found a relationship with God. And in my personal belief structure, that God is Allah, an Islamic God. And it brought me closer to my religion. But that's not what it set out to do.
Yeah.
So in my personal program and in my personal practices, I found religion. But that's not what Narcotics Anonymous aims for.
Okay.
You know. I started practicing religion, and by grace, I was actually thinking a couple of days ago how one day I was sitting at the Kaaba, you know, in Mecca, and I thought, how did I get there, you know? How did me, Rushda, the addict, you know, from the street, suddenly get to this place, not only in my life and in my spirituality, but in my religion and geographically, you know? But that's also what Narcotics Anonymous does, you know. It's when we take away the need to use and that obsession and that compulsion to use, which really etches into every single moment and every minute of every day. And when that's not there anymore, we suddenly have all this room to accomplish amazing things.
Rushda, you were speaking about it being a 12-step program and like practicing the 12 steps or working through the 12 steps. Tell us a bit more about what sponsorship is in the role. What is a sponsor and what does sponsorship mean?
So a sponsor is merely somebody who has more experience in working the steps.
Okay.
Ordinarily, they would have more clean time than you, but the only requirement is that they have more experience in working the steps. So a sponsor is somebody who, so I have a sponsor, one sponsor. I have a few sponsees. My sponsor has a few sponsees, but I work the steps. I write down the answers to the questions in the step work guide by myself, and then I read them out to her. There's a really good analogy that I like to use.
Rushda, I'm so sorry,
Okay.
we've run
ran
out of time. We'll be right back after the break. welcome back to Breaking the Cycle on Open Studio. We're chatting with Rushda from Narcotics Anonymous. Welcome back. Rushda, just before the break, you were speaking about sponsorship.
Yeah, so this is really big analogy that I like to use, little analogy that I like to use. So, you know those hammers with a stick in them?
Yeah.
And you know when you hammer them and eventually the metal part jumps off and then the hammer's broken.
Yeah.
So the irony about that is that in order to fix that hammer, you know, you stick the wooden part back into the seal, but then you stick nails in the top and you need a hammer to fix the broken hammer. So that's what sponsorship is about, you know. We never really completely independent of our addiction. You know, it's always there in the back because addiction is a disease and it's a state of mind almost. So what a sponsor does is they help us to keep that hammer fixed, you know. So it's also somebody that I read out my step work to. So it's quite an intimate relationship because I mean these are things that I bottle down and stuff that is like way back in the back of my mind. Generally, sponsorship meetings happen on a regular basis. And the other amazing thing about sponsors is that my relationship with my sponsor is all about me.
Yeah.
So that every single other relationship in my life no longer has to be. You know?
That's interesting.
Very. It's quite an amazing relationship because not only do I build a relationship with myself, I build a relationship with another human being. And through that, I build a relationship with my higher power so that I can build relationships with other people.
How has the 12 steps affected your relationships with others?
I would say my relationships have changed in ways that I can't even describe. Aside from the fact that they're no longer about me, I would say I have a lot more of them.
Yeah.
I have a lot more friends and connections with family than I've ever had in my life, you know, because I'm able to do that.
Yeah.
My perceptions have changed, you know, and Narcotics Anonymous allows me that, you know. Going to meetings allows me to see other people and mix with other people and different people, you know. So I'm put in a position where I can meet different people, I can speak to different people, and there are a lot of meetings, you know. We've got 70 meetings a week in the Western Cape.
Sure.
There are 36 national online meetings, and there are over 60,000 meetings in 130 countries across the world.
So it's a massive organization.
It's a huge organization. It's a huge fellowship,
Yeah.
you know.
Okay. So Rushda, I've often heard him speak about the Serenity Prayer, and it's a prayer that gets said at every meeting. Now, can you just explain to us what is the Serenity Prayer all about?
Yeah, so the serenity prayer is God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I can't change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So, you know, when we spoke about that overwhelming feeling, and we spoke about that need to stop and that want to stop and that want to get better and that need to get better and I want to get better, you know. There's a big difference between things we can do and things we can't do.
Yeah.
So I can stop using. I can go to a meeting. I can't make my mother trust me again, you know. And the wisdom to know the difference between those things. I can start living a better life. I can't change the way that people see me because I wanted to, you know. The way that people see me will change anyway when I start living a better life. But this is something I can do and that's something I can't do. So I need to accept what I can't do. I need the courage to do what I can. And sometimes I don't always hold within myself the wisdom to know the difference. You know, sometimes I've got to bring it to that circle, to the meeting. Sometimes I've got to take it to my sponsor. And either the courage or the serenity comes.
So basically, the Serenity Prayer is basically telling you what you have control over in life and what you don't have control over in life. And like, from what I've learned from people in recovery is that what you have control over is only yourself. You know, what you do, what you say, how you react to situations, and what you don't have control over is other people. Everything outside of yourself. You know, how people are driving, what they say about you, what they think about you, all those other things are things that you don't have control over.
It all comes back to surrender.
surrender and powerlessness and acceptance. Um, it's also common that they often speak about like living just for today or living one day at a time. And what does that mean?
Yeah, that's a living mindfully is what we try and do.
Yeah.
You know, we can't live in guilt
Yeah.
of yesterday, and we can't live in fear of tomorrow. But what I can do, and that also comes back to the serenity prayer. You know, what can I do today?
Yeah.
What can I do right now? You know, that's what I need to do. I need the courage to live today, you know, and I need the serenity and to accept everything that was and everything that will be. That doesn't mean that I'm going to shut the door on yesterday, you know. I'm going to work through those things when I can. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to plan for tomorrow. I'm going to plan and I'm going to put things into place when I can. But sitting there and curling into a fetal position and worrying about everything I did yesterday and everything I need to do tomorrow is not going to solve any problems, you know. We need to live today.
Okay. So it sounds like, in practical terms, somebody coming to recovery is often riddled with guilt and shame, and people often think about what they've done wrong in the past, and they're consumed with the wrongs that they've done in the past, and also consumed about what the future holds for them, and it's a difficult balance to kind of live just for today instead of projecting on the future or living in the past. What has your experience been personally?
Warren, that shame doesn't just end when we come into recovery, you know. Addiction does have a stigma, and that shame carries through years into recovery, you know. I'm ashamed about the things that I did to get my next fix, you know. I'm ashamed about the people that I hurt, you know, about my children that I hurt in that process. Um, do I wallow in it anymore? No. You know, the steps allowed me, step 8 and 9 allowed me to make
So
amends.
unfortunately, we've run out of time. It's been such a pleasure chatting to you about the 12 steps and Narcotics Anonymous. I hope we're going to come again sometime soon. Just to wrap up and summarize what we've been speaking about today is the Narcotics Anonymous Fellowship and how living just for the day and understanding what you have control over and what you don't have control over affects your recovery. Please join us next week when we'll be discussing how exercise, goal setting, and structure influences your recovery. Keep well.